In the last video about relationships, I want to talk about how relationships start and how we can study that, and then some perspectives on how relationships might maintain or how they might end up dissolving if those maintenance processes aren't carried out. So relationship initiation, obviously you got to meet somebody and choose to affiliate in one way or another, whether it's going on a blind date or asking someone out or something like that. But the way that this happens obviously is going to vary incredibly by when it's happening and where it's happening. Culturally, these things differ. It's different now than it was 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. You might meet someone in person still, obviously. There used to be, personal ads in the newspaper that people used. There used to be, Craigslist ads that don't exist anymore. There are many different online ways of meeting people, apps, and as somebody who started dating their person who's now their spouse over 10 years ago. I'm not someone who's ever used Tinder or Bumble or anything like that. So maybe not the most qualified person to talk about exactly how they function, but they, certainly influence the way that we might start a relationship with somebody. But either way, you kind of got to take a leap, whether it's in a technologically mediated way or just approaching a person, right? Um, but one of the most important things about starting a relationship and building intimacy with somebody is sharing information with them. It can start with something as simple as, where you're from, what groups do you belong to, whatever it happens to be. It can be about values, morals, deeply held beliefs, maybe about asking about the other person, obviously. And in that sense, reciprocity is key. Sharing about as much information as the other person is a very important line to cross when starting a relationship, because if you share too much, that might make the person uneasy, and it certainly would make you uneasy if you shared a lot and the other person did not. So trying to find that happy medium is often a way to build intimacy without going too quickly. Um, but information sharing is very, very important, not only in romantic relationships, but friendships as well. And when we get to group processes and prejudice and discrimination, we'll kind of circle back to this idea about how cross group friendships can reduce prejudice in a very important way. And it has a lot to do with information sharing and self disclosures. Um, so Oh, sorry. And the in a technologically different time than a lot of these things were first considered in relationship science. Knowing how much to share and when to share it can be even more uncertain when you don't have physical cues from somebody and you're just messaging or texting somebody. It often can be a little more uncertain. So that's another area that needs a lot more research. How online mediated relationships are a bit different. One way that you might study relationships that kind of seems a little hokey, but has been a real boon for relationship researchers, is by studying people in sort of speed dating scenarios, where you might bring people in to a laboratory, much like you would host some kind of speed dating event, or partner with some sort of event already and get people to consent to be part of it. And you get a lot of interesting data by matching people up and having them, just decide if they're willing to talk to each other again and answer some other questions. But in general, speed dating, you have a bunch of brief dates with a time limit generally. You talk to people and you move along a line, and you indicate yes or no, much like you would on like Tinder. It's like kind of the original swiping in whatever direction is the good one. But if both people say yes, same thing, they're a match, and they get an indication that they liked each other. But again, this is used often for research, that it can be really, really efficient. For a lot of relationships research, you got to bring two people into the laboratory at once or have two people fill out a survey. And for those, the relationship already exists, right? The only way you're going to get partners in is by already knowing if they're partners. By studying speed dating, you can actually study how relationships start in real time. You can look at initial attraction, and you can see how the people are influencing one another in a relationship. Okay, but once a relationship gets started, how do we know if it's going to keep going? What makes a relationship satisfying to the people involved in it, and what gives it some stability? One really influential set of ideas about this is called social exchange theory, and it's kind of uh, a bit of a grim perspective on it in some ways, that looks at relationships as in like an economic way, relationships similar to how financial markets work. Basically, it looks at the features that contribute to the success of a relationship as rewards, the positive feelings you're getting from the relationship, any status, companionship, how secure you feel, whether financially or physically, sex, any other things that might be positive from the relationship that you have. And then there are costs, basically the negative things. If people are not, reciprocating in their investment to you, if they are, if you're always paying for dinner, if they are living at your place and, not paying rent, if they, have a bunch of annoying habits, or they don't clean up after themselves, or you fight, those are all costs, obviously, all negatives that come in a relationship to varying degrees. When people enter into a relationship, they generally have expectations about how those rewards and costs are going to go. The kind of value of the relationship, in a sense, is seen by subtracting the costs from the rewards. You have the good stuff, you kind of figure in the bad stuff, and you see if you really have a positive or negative outcome. Um, if it's positive, then that relationship is going to tend to be good, right? You have more rewards than you have costs. But if you have more costs, then that will be a negative relationship, which is bad in a number of ways, right? And these expectations that you have matter a whole lot compared to your reality. So, some terminology that social exchange theory uses, um, are comparison level and your comparison level for alternatives. So comparison level, those are the expectations you have about the rewards and costs of the relationship that you are in. The comparison level for alternatives is the other options you have, basically. The expectations about the outcomes for, other people you could be dating. So comparison level is about your current relationship. Alternatives are about your other options, basically. And you compare the current to other options, and this tells you something about the stability and value of your current relationship, basically. The comparison level, your expectations about the current relationship influence your satisfaction. Basically, do your expectations match reality? If they are being exceeded, then your relationship is probably good, right? If they're not being met, then your relationship is probably bad. So satisfaction comes with expectations and reality. Your alternatives, though, if you have other options, that influences whether you're likely to stay in a relationship. So your alternatives have to do with the stability of your relationship. So if you kind of plot these things out on a negative to positive sort of axis here, there's a bunch of different comparisons we can make that show how satisfying and stable a relationship is going to be. So if your outcomes are better than your expectations and better than other alternatives, then you're going to have a happy and stable relationship. You're satisfied and you want to stick around because there's no other better alternatives. So that's kind of the ideal relationship. You're getting better than you expected and better than you could get elsewhere. If your other options are better than what you're actually getting, then that's going to influence your stability, right? You're happy that your expectations are being exceeded, but maybe you feel like you have some other potential relationship partner that would be even better. So you still have happiness because your outcomes are exceeding your expectations, but there are other possibilities out there making your relationship unstable. If those are flipped, if your outcomes are not as good as you hoped for or are expected, you're going to be unhappy. That's going to be an unsatisfying relationship. But if your outcomes are still better than other possibilities, like you have no other prospects, or you don't know anyone, or don't have plans to go try to meet anyone, then your relationship, even though it's unsatisfying and you're unhappy in it, it's going to be stable, and you'd be likely to stay in it because you don't have any other place to go, basically, or other person to shoot for. If your outcomes are worse than both your current relationship and your expectations of your current relationship and the other possibilities, then that's going to be unhappy and unstable. This is a relationship that people are generally not going to stay in, right? Because you're not getting what you hope for, and you are not getting what you could get from some other person. So these are all the different possibilities. And again, it's kind of like an economy here that you're trying to think about what your alternatives are, what you expected, what you're getting, calculating rewards and costs, and it has determinations for your satisfaction and your stability in your relationships. Another way of looking at how relationships are maintained has to do with maybe a slightly more straightforward way of looking at it. That you not only want to be getting the most out of your relationship for yourself, but you also want to be equal with the other person, basically. You want what you are getting and what you are losing, your rewards and your costs, to be equivalent to what the rewards and costs are for the other person, basically. The interesting thing about this is it's not just that people want more. Like if you are getting a lot out of a relationship and the other person is not, that also tends to be kind of unsettling or uncomfortable for people. People that are getting too much or people that are getting too little both tend to be relatively unsatisfied. So if your partner gives and gives and gives and gives, and you take and take and take and take, even though you're getting a lot, you are going to feel like you need to do something to restore equity. You're going to feel like you need to give more, and that hopefully will lead to you doing that and trying to actually restore that. Sorry, I have a typo here. This should be restore equality, not restore inequality. But you're trying to make sure that things are even in your relationship, basically. So equity theory also holds that this matters more early on. So when you have fewer commitments, you're not as long-term invested. Basically, you're more likely to try to keep track of these things, or maybe be more able to keep track of them. Because when you're in a relationship for 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years, the imbalances sometimes can be a little harder to pick up on because the time scale is so long. So equity matters more at the beginning of a relationship. And if you are in an intimate relationship that lasts a long time, these things are going to tend to matter less because, in a sense, you might just assume that things are going to even out over time. And if you didn't have equity in the first place, then you wouldn't still be in the relationship, most likely. In those long-term relationships, generally there's going to be more attention from both sides, caring about the other needs. You're not going to think about being paid back because, again, the time scale is just different, and you assume that things are going to balance out. So equity theory implies in a lot of ways that short-term relationships have to do with exchanges and making sure things are even, and kind of hammering that out. Long-term relationships are more communal in the sense that you take what you need with the expectation that you will give what you can later on. So, it's not just about relationship initiation. Equity theory says a lot about how relationships change over time. All right.